Hey guys, what is up? And welcome back to part 2 of the tanking guide. Some really positive and helpful feedback on the previous one, so we're going to be changing how I do this just a little bit. So basically I'm going to cover everything before jumping into a dungeon and talk about it all and cover some of the basics. That way I can stay focused, because when in a dungeon, random things happen and you end up kind of all over the place and not focusing on one thing. So that was some really good feedback from someone who also gave me some tips on some things that are good to cover for a beginner that I'm going to cover here, because I think the first one still makes sense to have, because normal and heroic I think is fine to just kind of willy-nilly jump into. But today, later on in the video, we're going to be demonstrating what I talk about in a kind of low Mythic Plus. And then in the next video, I'm going to do high Mythic Plus, and then hopefully we're going to do a final one on raiding, and then maybe at the end I'll do just like kind of finishing off video that covers how certain things work on the specific classes, as for example Blood Decay mitigates in a very different way, and I will discuss what exactly mitigation is in just a moment. So the first thing I wanted to bring up was, what does it mean to lead a group? So as you're starting to get to Mythic Plus, you're going to be expected as the tank to lead the group a lot more. You've got things like, for example, trash percent to think about. You as the tank need to decide what trash you're going to pull or attempt to skip. Now, obviously, keep in mind sometimes some skips are impossible in certain groups, especially if you don't have... I know in the past people have done crazy invisibility potion skips and stuff like that. I don't really know any skips in the current expansion. I tend to not bother with skips, especially if you're pugging, like I'm going to be doing for this series, is I don't recommend skipping most trash because it's just dangerous. Someone pulls it and then it's just a mess. So yeah, you as you're getting into Mythic Plus, you're kind of expected as the tank to be the leader a little bit more as you would compared to a normal and heroic. That's why I think it's important to discuss here. So I think for the most part, you kind of want to have a route for a dungeon as you're getting into Mythic Plus, and you can usually go with your normal and heroic route for the most part. It's when you start skipping trash that you start running into problems where you do need to pull extra trash for percentage. At least that's what I found. As long as you're just pulling the normal trash that you're coming across, most of the time you can hit the percentage. If you kill the final boss of a dungeon and you haven't got 100%, don't even stress. Like once you hit, you're about to pull the final boss, oh, we're not 100% trash. Don't worry about too much. Just kill the boss, then go pull a pack at the end of the dungeon. Just run back to the closest trash pack that you can find and nuke it down. And usually you only have like a couple of percent, so you kill like 1 or 2 mobs in it, and then you'll be done. If you are in a situation where you have to call like 2 different packs, just pull it like normal. Pull 1 pack at a time if that's what we've been doing throughout the dungeon. We get into deciding whether to pull 1 or more in a little bit. So yeah, don't stress too much about percentage, but keep it in the back of your mind that, percentage is a thing and you need to make sure you pull enough to not worry about it at the end when you get there. Now, another thing is, as the tank, you want to make sure you know anything that's relevant to you as a tank when it comes to mobs and bosses. So that might be interrupts, pats, so patrols. If you're tanking something somewhere and a patrol is going to enter that area at some point, try and move the pack away so you're not going to be pulling the extra pack that you don't need to pull, unless you want to pull it with that pack, of course. Which again, we'll get into why you would pull more than 1 pack at a time later on here. Another thing that you're going to do as the tank is set the pace. So if you have kind of lower DPS, then that's where you are going to be pulling 1 pack at a time, having a short little 1 to 2 second break between each pack. If you have really good DPS and a really solid healer, you're probably going to be going from pack to pack just instantly with no downtime in between. And that's when you need to start also keeping in mind, keeping an eye on your healer's mana. You always want to make sure in your raid frames you have power bars turned on, so that way you can see the healer's mana and know if they're low on mana. That basically means do not continue pulling too much unless it's a very safe pull. You always want to make sure your healer has enough mana to go into the pull, and that's something that you just pick up on how much mana they're using per pull, and that's where you kind of come into gauging the group. But back to the point of setting the pace is, it's up to you as the tank to decide, am I going to pull 1 at a time, nice and safe and slow, or am I just going to pull? And generally what that would mean is, like, as a trash pack is dying, you're, for example, charging into the next pack, getting threat on it. and getting that all sorted so that everyone can then just immediately move into the next bag. If your healer's constantly falling behind, I would say give a second or two between each pull. That just gives your healer some time to catch up, and obviously, as I mentioned before, keep an eye on that healer's mana if they're running out of mana. Especially if you're in a pug, maybe just give them like a few seconds or so to see if they sit down to have a drink once they've topped everyone off. If they don't sit down, don't force them to. You might want to mention it, for example, before a boss, if they might want some mana, as generally boss fights are longer than, for example, one trash pack. And generally healers will know if they need enough mana, and they will decide within those few seconds after topping everyone off if they want to sit down and have a drink or not. So for the most part, leave it up to them, but don't go pulling if your healer's low on mana, especially if they sit down to have a drink, because they're going to sit there and try and drink to get enough mana to deal with it, and then they're going to be catching up, which is not fun as a healer. I don't play healer, but I know it's not fun to try and catch up. So yeah, that's kind of setting the pace. Is just deciding how quickly you're going to pull by gauging both the DPS and the healer. If your healer's constantly falling behind, don't pull as fast, even if you do have good DPS. If you have good DPS, you can probably, and a bad healer, you can probably pull a little bit quicker than if they're both bad, just because it means the DPS is going to kill things before they're going to kill the group and the healer's too far behind kind of thing. But for the most part, you want to play it safe, and just, yeah, if your healer or DPS are a little bit slower than normal, then that's when you might want to slow it down a bit. If you have a really good DPS or a really strong healer or both, that's when you might want to speed up a little bit and you start pulling as the previous pack is dying. So as the tank, you're constantly going to be taking the main damage within the party in a dungeon. So there's a couple of things that cover here, your mitigations and what threat actually is. These are going to be both in the same kind of thing, since you are taking the main damage, and part of that is dealing threat and part of it is your mitigations. So if we start off with threat, basically how threat works in World of Warcraft is you do damage, you are dealing threat. That's basically what threat is. It's just a hidden number that's, as you deal damage to something, you're building up threat on it. Healing also does a bit of threat. It's extremely low, and the only time you're going to notice that is when ads spawn in a fight, for example. They're usually going to lock onto the healer immediately, unless you're something like a Blood DK that's doing a lot of healing. Because they're doing that little bit of healing threat. So as soon as ads spawn in a fight, they're going to go lock onto the healer and go after them. And that's where, in an ideal scenario, your healer's going to stand on top of you in those fights with ads. Or not on top of you, but near you. It's important. Never... If you're someone that also plays other roles besides tanking, never stand on top of the tank at all times, trust me. Make sure you're still kind of behind the boss or behind the trash pack. We'll get into why that's important a little bit for a tank, to never be stood on top of other people. But yeah, a good healer's going to stand on you during those fights. Stand near you, sorry, on those fights where ads are spawning. And when that happens, chances are that, yeah, they're going to lock onto your healer, just run over one AoE spell, so Thunderclap, your Blood Boil, all that kind of stuff. Or if you need to, single target them, especially if they're not in range, you might need to Heroic Throw, Moonfire, something like that, just to kind of get that little bit of threat on them and pull them over. But yeah, basically, yeah, so like I said, threat is just done through dealing damage or healing. And how it works is, if you're tank spec'd, you're dealing extra threat. I don't know how much extra threat you're actually doing. I don't know the math on it. I think it's about 4 times the amount of threat as DPS's. Again, I'm not 100% sure on that. It's very much balanced in a way where, as long as you're an even group in terms of your item level, your performance, your skill as a player, stuff like that, you're basically at all times going to be definitely dealing enough threat to make sure that you're not going to lose threat to whoever. Now, obviously, some classes do burst. And they will pull threat off a mob or two, or in some cases the entire pack. Don't stress, just keep on DPSing them, and you'll pull threat back. You do basically have a backup in the terms of a taunt. Every single class is going to have some form of taunt. The Monk has a more fancy one that actually makes the mob run twice as fast, or 50% faster. It gives them increased movement speed and makes them run directly at them at an increased speed. So that one's kind of cool. But for the most part, taunt, it lasts, I want to say 3 seconds when you taunt, and it's basically going to put you at the top of the threat, and then for that kind of 3-second window, you're the only one that can deal threat to it. So you want to, for example, on a warrior, you're probably going to want to shield slam in that time. It's your highest single target burst AoE button, essentially. So you're going to try and put yourself as high on the threat as possible. So yeah, like I said, you taunt, puts you at the top, boom, shield slam. Now that thing's glued to you for a very long time. One thing I like to recommend is never use Taunt on Pull in dungeons. Always save it, for example, when there's a burst or something just happens to lose threat on you because you're not focusing it while the rest of the group is. Whereas, for example, in a raid, which we'll get into raiding specific stuff later on in the series, that's when, if you're tanking the boss first, that's when you want to use your Taunt on Pull, because the other tank is obviously there. They might be pulling threat because they might have higher DPS than you, as well as a lot of people are going to burst on the opener. So for safety in raid, Taunt on Pull. That's my recommendation anyway, especially because you've got the other tank to deal with. Chances are you're going to need to taunt to make sure they're not accidentally pulling threat, because they're going to be DPSing as well. And that's another thing with your threat is, because you're doing increased threat, it's always going to have everything glued to you, but you also want to make sure that you're constantly just DPS rotationing, basically. You want to be doing your DPS rotation. DPS from your tank does actually matter quite a bit. You'll be amazed at how much the damage from your tank actually means. Especially as you get higher up, normal and heroic rating, for example, you're not going to notice as much. But it's still a factor. For example, we had like a wipe that was like the boss had 15k HP left. What was it, 2 nights ago? So that was a bit feels bad, like. Now obviously the tank's in my guild, which is me and another guy. We were doing our DPS rotations and stuff. That was just really unfortunate. We just had a few deaths in it, but that's fine. But yeah, like if you're not doing your full DPS rotation at all times as a tank, you can have situations like that where you might wipe on a very small amount of HP, because that was literally like 1 second of DPS from just a mediocre DPS player. Because I think we had people who were doing like double that per second in terms of DPS, if I remember correctly. So yeah, that's a lot of detail about threat, but basically, as a tank, you do increased threat. Threat is done through dealing damage. Do damage, you're going to have threat. That's kind of all there is to it. There's no real fancy things about threat. If something gets pulled off you, taunt it if you feel you need to. Personally, if I feel threat is one of those things that you're just going to get used to, of how much threat you deal compared to how much a DPS is doing. And obviously, if a DPS is doing more DPS, they're doing more threat, and you're just going to get a feel for that. And you're going to know basically, do I need to taunt, or is one shield slam going to bring this back on me? That kind of thing. So yeah, it's important. As a tank, you have a lot of AoE options a lot of the time, I find. A lot of cleave and AoE. So you're going to be spamming AoE as much as possible to get threat on the entire group. And then whoever the group's focusing, that's what you want to target them and be doing your single target spells against them. You're going to be auto-attacking them plus your single target spells, and then you're going to have threat on the one that everyone's focusing. But for the most part, I find that I don't even need to single target the one that the rest of the group's fighting. Usually your AoE damage is going to be enough to hold it. And you can got to mess around with that, especially in normal heroics and low mythic plus. You can really mess around with what you're capable with threat. You get a feel for how much threat you're doing to things and how much threat the rest of the group's doing. That's going to pull it off of you. It's just something you're going to get used to over time. So yeah, we're going to leave threat there because I've been talking about it for a while, but it is a shockingly complicated thing, I guess, when you think about it. But it's something you won't even think about after a while. You just every now and then you have to throw your taunt out when someone bursts something. So the next thing is, how do you mitigate damage? So like I said, the tank is going to be the one taking the most damage. We spoke about threat. That's going to make everything attack you, basically. That's what threat does. It means they're all going to be focusing the main attacks on you. Now not everything, but a lot of things will have spells or certain attacks that will cast on other players, and we'll choose someone at random and do a certain cast, or there might be an AoE spell or something like that, and that's going to be hitting the rest of the group. For the most part, though, the tank that has threat, if we're talking about Mythic Plus here, all the mobs are going to be mostly auto-attacking, stuff like that, that main target, and using their abilities on that target that has threat. So you're going to be taking the bulk of the damage, and that's when we get into mitigation. So basically, what does mitigation mean? It just means mitigation is taking less damage from attacks. And what I mean by that is, for example, a lot of tanks might have a passive that increases their armor. Higher armor means you take less damage. So if we look at the armor stat, physical damage reduction, 55.38%. So that's what I meant by, like, there might be something that passively as a tank. And every tank's going to have different passives that boost their mitigation. The main things you're going to see are HP increases, armor increases, and even just flat damage reduction increases. Now, I believe they removed most, if not all, of the flat damage decreases. Did I say increase before? I did mean decrease. And before, I think a lot of classes had like just passively they took 5 or 10% less damage. But I think they removed a lot of those quite recently because tanks were kind of overperforming, I guess, in Blizzard's opinion. Which makes sense. I think especially some tanks did feel quite powerful. But yeah, you're going to get these passive increases that, yeah, increase to your max HP. Just means you have more HP to work with to take the damage. And then you're going to, yeah, have these other increases that are like just, you know, boost to your armor, boost to just flat, taking less damage, stuff like that. And that's going to boost your passive mitigation, as it's called. I'll be honest, I don't even know what the passive mitigation is on a warrior. Probably under the protection. Do we have something? So I guess mastery, I think that increases your block chance, right? Yeah. So your mastery is increasing your block, which is a big thing on a warrior. You gain some parry, and here we go. So this is your main one here. Your stamina is increased by 30%, that's what I was talking about, more HP to work with, and your armor is increased by 70% of your strength. So that's what I was talking about there, having an increase to your armor, which, as I mentioned, reduces the physical damage taken. That's an important thing. Mitigating magic and physical damage are two very different things. Mitigating magic is usually done by specific spells. So, for example, we have Spell Reflect here on the warrior. Read your class abilities to figure out what is going to mitigate against magic. Obviously, self-healing is going to mitigate against magic the best. But some things are going to, yeah, better mitigate against magic compared to physical damage. For example, armor is only effective against physical damage. The warrior is very good against defending against physical. Something like the blood DK is very good against mitigating against magic. So yeah, read things like do your different mitigation options, which we'll get into what active mitigation is in a moment. But yeah, you basically passively going to be taking less damage, have more health to work with, stuff like that. That is going to help out with just passively taking less damage. So up next is active mitigation, and we'll touch on cooldowns here as well. So active mitigation is something that either boosts your defenses in some way with based on having a cooldown, or based on using a resource. And the cooldown is usually going to be quite short. So if we have, for example, here, shield block is a 13-second recharge and has 2 charges on it. That's an example of one that's reliant on a cooldown to give you mitigation. And then we have something like ignore pain, which costs rage, so costs a resource to mitigate damage. That's going to be something that's pretty persistent over all your tanks. Is they're going to have something, some might have a combination of both a cooldown and a resource. Like I think even, yeah, shield block costs 30 rage as well, so it still costs rage to do shield block, but it's also gated behind a cooldown. Some will be both, some will have one of each, some will just have both, like the warrior, and yes, some might just have one of them. So yeah, one thing you want to kind of look at is what are your active mitigation options, and that's what these shorter cooldowns or resource-based ones are called. They're your active mitigation. They're generally not going to last too long, but they're generally going to give you some boost to defense. They might boost your armor, they might increase your block, they might just flat out reduce the damage you're taking, they might heal you, stuff like that. And that's stuff to kind of look out for your active mitigation. I don't want to go into specifics. Like I said, final video of this series will probably be specifics on each tank, and I will go through what your mitigation is on that. The only thing I will mention on the blood DK, your active mitigation is Death Strike, which is in terms of healing yourself. That's how you effectively active mitigation on a blood DK through healing. I only want to mention that one because that class is so unique. But hopefully that covers active mitigation. It generally doesn't last quite as long as a cooldown. It's generally weaker than a cooldown, and it's going to have a shorter, quite short cooldown. For example, shield block, like I said, has a 13-second cooldown, or it's going to be based off a cost of a resource. So, like I said, ignore pain costs 35 rage. And obviously, like I said, looking out for stuff that are effective against magic, so Spell Reflect, as the name suggests, has probably got something to do with magic. 20-second cooldowns, this is a cooldown based one. It's going to reflect the first spell that's cast at you and just reduce magic damage you take by 20% for 5 seconds. So that's an example of magic active mitigation. So you know something's going to hit you with big magic damage. That's where on a warrior you're going to hit Spell Reflect. Other classes you're going to have other abilities, and I do encourage you to read through your mitigation options to see which one is going to be good against magic. Sometimes the best thing you can have against magic is healing. Keep that in mind. Like I said, Blood DK, although it has anti-magic shell, its main source of mitigation is also just healing itself. So then we're going to talk about cooldowns, which is just stronger options for mitigating. Generally last longer, big cooldowns, very powerful. I say last longer, 8 seconds is quite a long time. How long does shield block last? 8 seconds, so there we go. They actually last about as long. Don't play a warrior, not very familiar. Like I said, I main the Blood DK, so I'm not as familiar with all the different buff lengths, cooldown times, and all that stuff of other classes, cooldowns and active mitigation. So there we go. It lasts about as long as shield block, but it's going to reduce all damage you take by 40%. This is an example of a cooldown, because it's got 3.5 minute cooldown. So your cooldowns are going to be anywhere from like 2 till 5 minutes on your major defensive cooldowns. So for example here, like I said, shield wall just completely stops 40% of all damage for 8 seconds. And it's 3.5 minute cooldown. So lots of damage negation, big cooldown. Yeah, that's when there's a ninja pool and you're now doing 2 packs instead of 1 pack. You're probably going to want to pop shield wall if you think your group is not equipped to deal with it. In the warrior, we have a lot of other cooldowns as well. I don't want to go into specifics too much. I'm just on the warriors. That's why I'm mentioning warrior ones. So I do recommend you, again, like I said last episode, read through all your abilities and passives to understand what your class can do. I know I just showed an example of not really knowing what the warrior can do, but I'm quite comfortable that I've played warrior before and I don't need to read through all my abilities to understand what everything does. I know shield wall is big cooldown, big mitigation. That's all I really personally need to know. I didn't need to know that it lasted as long as shield block. Shield block only blocks melee attacks anyway. But yeah. Definitely read through all your abilities to see what ones are your cooldowns, what ones are your active mitigations, what one are your DPS rotations, which one are your DPS cooldowns as well, is a big thing. So another thing I want to touch on with mitigating is how do your healers come into this? They're basically the damage that you can't mitigate, they're going to heal you up on it, is the kind of main thing about how your healers come on into it. Some classes are very much about reducing the damage they take by a lot, but then they can't really heal themselves. That's where the healer comes in. Tank might be reducing a lot of damage, they're still going to be taking damage, so then the healer's there to push your health back up. Whereas something, again, Blood DK, I'm going to bring it up a lot. The Blood DK relies less on the healer because they do a lot of self-healing. So you might find healers who heal a Blood DK, if they really know what they're doing, they might just mostly put some hots on it, watch their runic power bar, and only really spam heal them if they, for example, vamp or they're not in melee range or they're out of runic, stuff like that. Again, I got a bit quite specific there on the Blood DK. I don't want to do that too much, but as mentioned, Blood DK is very unique in the way it mitigates damage, so I do want to bring it up a little bit, even in these basic guides, for you to understand that that one's a bit different. But all the other ones are mostly going to be negating damage, getting healed by the healer, and maybe a little bit of self-healing themselves, like the Druid has pretty decent self-healing on it. So there we go, I think that's mitigation covered. So another thing is movement and positioning. So as the tank, for example, big thing with movement is going to be like when you pull a pack, as I mentioned last episode, you want to point it away from the group. You never want to point a pack or a boss into the group. You're also going to want to, if you're doing safe pulls, you want to make sure you pull it away from any other packs, so you're not getting any of these accidental ninja pulls. And a ninja pull is just when a DPS or healer either purposely or accidentally pulls a second pack. Sometimes DPS or even healers are going to be trying to pull for the tank to be like, oh, pull bigger, I can handle bigger. Remember, as a DPS or healer, just because you can handle bigger does not mean the group can handle bigger. Really do leave it up to your tank. They're going to make the decision about whether or not to pull more or not. So please, if you're someone that is watching this to get into tanking and you're still going to be DPSing, do not pull for your tank. It's going to get really annoying as a tank when your DPSs are pulling for you. It's quite a big deal because sometimes You might have really strong DPS, but your healer's just constantly behind. You don't want to be doing double pulls all the time. Your healer's not going to be able to keep up, even if your DPS is really high. So keep that in mind there. So if you're going safe, pull it away from other packs to try and keep it safe. Or if there's a patrol coming, try and move it away so you can get away from that. And another thing is to either handle knockbacks or just point cleaves into the wall, or just, yeah, generally keeping things safe, is to point stuff into a wall. So when I say point it away from the group, if you pull it into a wall, chances are no DPS want to stand there anyway. So if there's a mob that I demonstrated in the last episode that had a cleave ability that as the tank you could sidestep and you want to point it away from the group, if you point that into a wall, chances are there's no one's going to be standing there, because the camera angles you get when standing in front of a wall as a melee is horrible. So yeah, chances are if you point stuff into a wall, it's generally pretty safe. And if it's got a knockback, you're not going to get knocked back very far. You're just going to go into a wall. Now, obviously, not all maps have walls, but there you go. Point it to a wall where you can, or just point it away from the group is the biggest thing. Because I think I demonstrated cleaves quite well in the last episode. It might be something you can move out as the tank, which I could in the last episode, but sometimes you can't move out. And it's something that's just targeted at the tank. You don't want to point it at the other players, or it's going to kill them. That's another thing I wanted to touch on when I was talking about bad camera angles when you point it at a wall. As a tank, get used to having terrible camera angles. You're going to get used to it the longer you tank for. Especially if you're being a good tank and pointing stuff at the wall where necessary. For example, last expansion aside in Athros, there's one section where everyone had to go stand between the boss and a wall, and all the DPS and healer players were complaining about bad camera angles. Meanwhile, me and the other tank were not worried by it because we'd been dealing with these awful camera angles as tanks for so long. I found it very weird that all these other people were complaining about camera angles. I'm sitting there like, oh, I've been dealing with these camera angles for ages. I've learned to deal with it. I can handle it now. But yeah, it's pointing stuff into the wall and having just terrible camera angles as a tank is something you're going to have to get used to. You're going to have to make sure you have ways to track casts that aren't like, when you click a guy, it might have whereas this guy's name is, there might be a health bar there. You can't rely on the cast bar that's there and stuff like that. You need to rely on your cast bar that might be down here on the health bar, depending on where you happen to put it on your UI. So yeah, make sure you're never relying on the cast bar or even the debuff bar, for example, or buff bar that's up here. Make sure you learn to kind of do it down here, or if you have like weakauras that are showing stuff like that, then you can use those as well. So yeah, make sure you use. It's just going to be something you're going to get better at over time, is having awkward camera angles where you just can't see anything. And obviously having like boss mods and stuff like that to tell you when they're casting something that you're meant to move out of is going to help, because sometimes you just physically can't see the floor. So that's fun. I also mentioned Death Ball in the last episode. Death Ball is basically just grouping all the ads up as close together, so everyone can either passively cleave or AoE on them and stuff like that, get more damage on the entire group. Whether if everything's spread out, it's going to take longer to kill it all because they can't cleave on it as well. And obviously as a DPSer, you like to cleave things all the time. Having a good tank that groups it all up for you to easily cleave it all feels really good. And that's what you want to do as a tank, is try and group it up into what I refer to as the Death Ball. I did not come up with that term, by the way. I just wanted to make that clear. So yeah, Death Ball, very important to do that. Obviously some classes like the Death Knight have grip to just easily grip casters in. Any of the other classes that can't grip, you're going to be using things like, if it's a caster, you want to interrupt it. You interrupt it, it is going to be locked out of spellcasting for a little bit. It's going to have to try and melee you, assuming you have threat on it, and then you can pull it into the melee group. Or if there's only one cast and a bunch of melee, you can just move the melee to it. If the caster's in a bad spot, then that's where you will want to try and, like I said, interrupt it, then pull it into where you want it with the rest of the melee. You can also use line of sight. So if something in this doorway here was trying to cast at me, I come over here, for example, it doesn't have line of sight, it can't cast anything at me, right? As long as I have threat on it. So then what it's going to do is it's going to move around here, and it's probably going to move to somewhere around here or something like that. And then once it gets line of sight, it's going to start casting at me again, and then that's when I can come around back and start having the Death Ball build up around here, where the caster ends up being not necessarily a caster, but just any kind of range, because obviously you'd have like 100 equivalent mobs that aren't technically caster, but they're range. Then you got to build your Death Ball here in this kind of corner, because it's going to bring the range one there. So I think I kind of touched on this already, but just kind of how does the tank guide the dungeon? And that's like, as I mentioned earlier, the tank should be the one initiating the pulls, deciding whether to pull more than one pack at a time. Obviously, knowing the mechanics yourself as the tank. So even if it's something like the DPS should DPS this thing, as the tank a lot of the time, you're going to be helping DPS that. So chances are you're going to want to learn those kind of mechanics and the DPS it. So that the group's like, oh, what happened? We died, and it's because an ad was left alive. You can be like, oh, this ad needs to die. Because as the tank, you should also be DPSing it so you know those kind of mechanics. But also knowing some things, for example, I don't know if there's any in this expansion, or even in Season 1 of Dragonflight, but I know in previous expansions there's been things where only the tank can interrupt a certain spell. You as a tank need to be aware of that. It's either going to kill you or the group, or let the boss heal. In BFA there was something, although I think the whole group could interrupt that one. But it was generally it was decided it was up to the tank to deal with it. But a big thing last expansion in Shadowlands the spell was called Patty Cake, and only the tank could interrupt it. If they didn't interrupt it, the tank was probably dead. So yeah, make sure you're aware of important interrupts, whether it be on trash or the boss, because a lot of the time Blizzard like to make interrupts where if the spell goes through without being interrupted, it's pretty much a wipe, or it's just going to be a lot more annoying to deal with it. So I covered that. Okay, so I think that's most basic stuff that I want to cover. And now we'll talk a little bit just around, because like I said, talking about now getting into some low-level Mythic Plus, which I'll be demonstrating later on in the video. I'm just going to demonstrate all the stuff that I've been talking about as well. So I mentioned trash percentage, so that's fine. Knowing the affixes is a big thing for the tank. There's quite a number of affixes that are very important to the tank. For example, if you have something, say, bolstering, you don't want to pull big because everything's going to get bolstered up and do much more damage. My best advice here, I'm not going to go through all the affixes. Do your research on the affixes, understand what each of them do so you know how to handle them. So this week we don't actually have really anything exciting. The highest we'll be getting access to is Sanguine here. Still a tank thing, to be fair. Basically, a mob dies, it's going to leave a pool on the ground, it's going to heal enemies, damage players. You need to make sure as something dies, you're moving everything else out of the Sanguine so they're not healing up and your melee aren't standing in it dying. Everything else like Volcanic is just people need to move out of it. Half the time it doesn't spawn on you anyway. And obviously be aware of Fortified and Tyrannical. Fortified means the trash is going to be harder. That might be when you are doing safe one pull at a time. Whereas Tyrannical means the boss is going to be harder, and that's when you want to kind of, maybe save some more cooldowns for the boss. I did mention tank smashes in the last episode, which I might quickly touch on here because I don't think I touched on it yet. Tyrannical, that's when you might want to use a big cooldown for the tank smash. And speaking of tank smash, that's basically, not all, but a lot of bosses will have an ability that is going to hit the tank really hard, or just be specific to the tank in some way. And generally that's where, if it's the tank smash is going to hit you really hard, that's when you want to put up your active mitigation, or even on Tyrannical, you might end up having to use big cooldowns like Shield Wall, stuff like that to mitigate it. One thing I did do, I sat down for like an hour, it's in here, isn't it? And made a weakaura that I will have linked in the description. That is, where is it? Here we go. Dragonflight Season 1 Tank Smash Warning. And what this is going to do is it's going to play the air horn sound every time a boss in any of the Season 1 Mythic Plus dungeons casts the Tank Smash. It's going to play that air horn sound, and that basically means put up some mitigation for this. So I'm going to have that linked in the comments to help some people out, because I know you might not play with boss mods, or sometimes I find boss mods that don't make it very obvious. It might just be a very quiet voice that just says defensive, and it's not very helpful. So I made this that if you maybe don't play with boss mods, or you just want something more obvious or something helpful just to learn what the tank smash ability is, because you should learn what the ability name is and stuff like that, and what it specifically does. But this, to get started, is going to teach you basically press a defensive here because it's casting the tank smash, and you'll be able to see on your screen what it's currently casting when the air horn goes off, and a little icon in the middle of the screen. So eventually you'll just learn what it is, and eventually one day you might be able to delete that weakaura because you won't need it anymore. Final thing before we jump into a dungeon here, I think, is just to mention to test stuff. So test, for example, on a tyrannical +10 key with the tank smash. First one, try just regular active mitigation. See how much damage it does. If it chunks you for like 80% of your health, then it's like, okay, I might want to think more about mitigating this much higher, like using bigger cooldowns and stuff like that. And just testing like as well, like, can I sidestep this? Can I use line of sight here to pull this pack? All kinds of things. So just test, basically, is the best way to put it. Is just test anything you can think of that you want to figure out what it does. As the tank, I'm constantly testing stuff to see what does what, how certain things work, what can I do with certain things. Yeah, so we're going to jump into a dungeon now. I'm going to try and demonstrate some of the stuff and explain it as we're going through the dungeon. Okay, here we are. We are in a +4 Shadow Moon Burial Grounds in a pug here. So I will start making my way there and I'll cut back when we're all ready to go. Alright, welcome back. We are at the dungeon, just, oh, everyone's here. Oh, there you go. So I am going to eat some food here. We're only in a +4, like I mentioned. So nothing too crazy. Yeah, we will flask, even though it is a low key. Here we go. So the first few pulls, I'm going to be just kind of seeing what the group's DPS and healing is like, while keeping my active mitigation up as necessary. Health is moving a little bit. Not too bad, they're keeping me topped. I'm going to stun that, as I mentioned, using stuns for interrupts, and now I'm going to move them out of the Sanguine. Another one is about to die, so I'm pre-moving. There you go. So that was actually not bad. A little bit of low healing at the start of the pull, but they caught up quite well, and DPS seems pretty decent too. Got Spell Reflect, Active Mitigation up for some magic damage here. Then I'm going to ignore Pain the next one, because I know Spell Reflect will be on cooldown. And that's going to die, and I'm quite confident with this group. Oh, healer's actually a little bit behind on the group overall. So we'll give him just a little second as I move over to the next group. I'm going to Spell Reflect just to be safe here. And then, yeah, you know, trying to keep up some uptime on my shield block. Oh, this could be awkward. Here we go, he's moving. There we go. Again, just give the healer just a second to catch up here. Not a very big pull. There we go. And then jump down here. So as mentioned, leading the group, I'm deciding up there I think we could have gone left or right. I went left. And obviously as you see the group follows me, as you should do as a DPS or healer, is follow your tank. I know it sucks to not be in control, but it is important to let your tank decide where you're going. Ooh. And I'm going to heal there because I was getting a bit low. And they're starting to die, so I'm moving them in preparation for the Sanguine that's coming. And there we go. I'm not trying to do stuff specifically for the affixes that I'm running, although it may seem like I'm trying to just tell you how I'm dealing with things so you can use the knowledge of just thinking about it as you're playing to deal with these things as you're going through. So Healer's Mana is good enough for a boss here, so I'm going to go in. And then help out with DPS as well. There's an ad spawning, and we want the group to DPS it. Looks like someone's got an auto marking add-on to mark it as skull. And you can see, I don't know if it was because I came over here, but at the very least the group did swap to it. It does seem like it was very much they knew what they were doing there, which is very good to see. I'm going to ignore pain here for the damage going out. So here you want to get on one of the white runes, so I just made it. And he's dead. And everyone is pretty good health-wise here. So I want to get ahead to pull these around here. Are we going to get a ranged interrupt? Oh, let's pull this whole pack. Okay, so interrupts are non-existent, good to know. Yeah, I think these guys really need to be interrupted, or they cause a lot of problems. Oh, there we go. Looks like someone else feared or interrupted of some kind. Oh my goodness. This hallway just keeps going. Stun the whole group there. And I'm shield walling here because this is quite nasty. Gonna heal myself. Oh, and that's sanguine. And nothing's moving. Good to see. You can see that guy's just casting in it. Cast is the bane of existence when you're not playing a blood DK. Alright, I'm moving out of range of this guy, so he has to move. Oh, he's still just spamming over there. Yeah, and see that guy doesn't care about line of sight, so that's always fun. Didn't interrupt really. Come here. There we go. Oh, he's immune to stun, alright. So yeah, all those deaths were on me there. I should have been pulling back that way instead of keep on pulling that way, but this hallway really sucks. They're all just so close to each other that it's kind of hard to not pull them all. My healer a moment. Yeah, he seems alright. Now this pack, I know both these dudes need interrupting, but 3. Gonna stun them all. And then hope they die before they do the next one. There we go, very good DPS. There's sanguine on the boss. I do not have interrupt. DPS is so high it doesn't even matter. I think someone might have interrupted the other one. So boss here, this boss I know has a frontal, so I'm going to face him away from the group. And there it is. You can see my weak aura going off there to let me know he's doing a big cast.
Run away. None escape the void. Attack speed. From your former masters.
Ooh, he did get his cast off, but that's okay. Now I know something, yeah, here we go, this guy will pull when you pull that next pack. So you can actually pull it early, it seems. So you saw there I was just constantly moving that boss, pointing that boss away from the group. Okay, these need to be stopped. Where the hell did this guy come from? I'm gonna try and move them around here. This guy's just out of the sanguine. Want all this sanguine away from him. Alright, now they can all focus on the other guy. There we go. Killer Mana's still looking okay, actually. Now this one, I know these spiders do quite a nasty dot, so I will skull them. There you go, so I'm going to interrupt that. I mean, that's another thing, like, as the leader of the group, marking things as skull that you want to die. A lot of the time you will find the tank is the one making that decision. So if you're tanking, it is recommended that you mark stuff as skull that you think is dangerous. Everyone will have their own opinion, of course. Personally, for me in that pack, it was the spider. Nothing else is particularly dangerous. Well, these little guys don't really mean too much. I spell reflected and ignored pain there because I think one of those casts got off. I don't know if it's targeted at a single person or if it's like the whole group, so I put up defensives to be sure. I mean, you can see my health stayed quite healthy there. He died in the sanguine, awesome. I need my healer just a second because I am down at like 50%. And that'll do. He seems to not be too bothered by my health, so I'm not going to wait around for him to continue not caring, really. Don't see, this guy, he shouldn't be standing over here because this guy does a cleave and I'm trying to face it away. But maybe he's aware and he just wants to be a little bit further that way. Yeah, I'm just going to step out of that. It's a side step there. What is this guy doing? Keeping my mitigation up a little low on health, so I'm going to use a self-heal here. And moving them out of the sanguine as it's spawning. There we go. Oh, the healer's a bit behind, but I accidentally pulled this. Seems to be doing magic damage, so I put spell reflect up. Oh yeah, don't go too far forward, healer. Don't want to get you hit by the cleave ability. There it is, body slam. And again, just moving out of it so I don't get hit and making sure it's always pointed away from the group. Luckily our healer seems to understand that that ability exists because he hasn't gone too far as of yet. His mana is a little low. He is having a drink. There we go. It's like I said, keeping an eye on that. He's got plenty of mana for a boss now. Okay, so there's going to be an update because this one does not need to be screaming this much.
Inhale, get inside a puddle.
Ooh. This one again, knowing the mechanics, if I was in melee there, I'd be getting chomped by the boss. So I'll move out here instead.
Watch your step.
So that's one thing to keep in mind with that weakaura pack that I linked. So just keep an eye on it for when there's updates, because clearly this one needs to be removed. I might just disable the sound on it rather than removing it. Oh my god, is this another one? It is. Oh my god, the healer's dead.
Watch your feet. Watch your step.
Wait, is this the main boss? No, that one's the main boss.
Inhale, get inside a puddle.
Oh my god. Is that way more than I thought? There we go. I don't think anyone here can res, can they? Oh, he releases right here. Well, how convenient. So there we go. Healer died there, so that was interesting. Luckily that boss didn't actually seem to do too much damage. Mark one of the spiders to die first. And interrupt one of them. One of them's going to go off, so I'm going to spell reflect in case that is on me. I have a debuff. Is he just testing there? Checking if I had a debuff after that cast went off. I did, so now I know for future. I definitely do want defenses off when that spell goes off. Healing myself. Oh no, I couldn't interrupt that. Is he out of the sanguine? He is. I want to get out of that corner. Because no one could really DPS it and the healer couldn't hit me too well, I don't think. Now, this pack hurts on fortified, as far as I know. Spell reflecting early here. And I'm going to use some offensive cooldowns to kill it quickly. See what I mean here by awkward camera angles? You see the sanguine there, so I want to move this guy. Doesn't look like he has the buff. And there, so that's an example of some of the camera angles you'll be dealing with as a tank. But yeah, I was checking down here to see if he had the buff from standing in sanguine. It didn't look like he did, at least. All groups here, mana healer good. Oh, that's on cooldown, that's why that wasn't working. Now this one you can't point away from the group, so you just have to hope they know how to move away from it. A demo shout just for a bit of extra mitigation. So that's another form of mitigation, you can actually debuff enemies to make them do less damage. The warrior, for example, has demo shout. I don't know of any others off the top of my head. Moving the boss to the ad that they're killing here. Again, knowing the mechanics so that I know to move the boss there, that they can cleave onto it as they're killing that ad. I'm going to demo shout him again. And we're in execute range here. Again, still learning the warrior, so I'm not used to having to swap to execute. And there we go. A very... Despite one corridor there, we plus 3'd it. What a nice wrist upgrade for me. Oh, and it has haste. Thank God. Keep losing haste slightly. And say thank you. So there you go. I hope that helps getting into some low-level Mythic Plus and understanding a few more of the basics there. Again, any feedback welcome. Let me know what you did like and did not like about it. Hopefully explaining it and then jumping in and demonstrating and talking about the stuff that I explained earlier makes it a little bit easier to understand there. So that way, if I am going a little bit all over the place in the chaotic dungeon, then that way it's already been explained to you before we jump into the chaos down there. Whoa, frame rate, hello. There we go. So yeah, again, hope that was helpful. If it was, of course, do give the video a like. That helps me out immensely. And thank you everyone who gave feedback on the previous video. Feedback on this video, again, is more than welcome. So thank you all. And yeah, subscribe if you want to see the rest of the series. Thank you very much.